And so a lot of times what I'm trying to do is really look at, well, what is this thing that we think of as kind of woo? Where is the science underneath the thing that
Mhm,
most people think of as kind of woo? And upward spirals is a perfect example. It sounds really hippy dippy, and
mhm.
in actuality, it's measurable effects.
Wits and Weights community, welcome to another episode of the Wits and Weights podcast. We are talking today with Darlene Marshall about the fascinating interplay between holistic wellness coaching and positive psychology and how it can help you unlock your full potential. We'll explore the concept of holistic wellness, how emotions can be used as information, and the power of upward spiraling for building resilience and enhancing performance. We'll dive into habit priming, neurological flexibility, and the balance between ancient traditions and modern science. Darlene Marshall is a holistic wellness coach who's been working in the fitness and wellness space since 2012. She's an expert at the intersection of fitness, wellness, and well being, and was named America's favorite trainer by BurnAlong in 2021. She hosts the Better Than Fine podcast. Make sure to follow, make sure to subscribe, Better Than Fine, and is certified with NASM in wellness coaching and personal training. I was personally introduced to Darlene through my friend and fellow podcaster, Carl Berryman of Inspired by Impact. And then I started following her podcast, Better Than Fine. And she explores the interplay between ancient traditions and modern science. So, topics on her recent episodes, things like the benefit of time outdoors, mindset topics like analysis paralysis, and even the additive approach to nutrition. So, check it out. She has a master's in applied positive psychology from the University of Pennsylvania and additional certifications in nutrition coaching, neurolinguistic programming, 200-hour YTT and alignment yoga, and training in sleep coaching, motivational interviewing, meditation, and mindfulness. You can find her on Instagram at darlene.coach or on her couch with her two cats. Darlene, I am truly excited to welcome you to the show.
Hi, Philip. Thank you so much for having me. I am excited to be here with you.
Awesome. And I want to start right with that unique background you had. We were talking about beforehand, which is holistic wellness coaching, but also this degree in applied positive psychology. And the combination really appeals to me because behavior and psychology, they really seem to be at the heart of why people do or do not achieve the results they want or, put in place the wellness practices that will serve them. So help me and the listener understand how your expertise in positive psychology has influenced your values and your approach as a coach. Maybe it's even the foundation of your practice.
Oh, I think it'd be hard for me to tease them apart at this point. But I came in the positive psychology space primarily still working as a personal trainer. So I was teaching yoga and mindfulness meditation, working with my clients one on one, and entered the positive psychology space with every intention to primarily bring those tools back into a fitness context. And then the pandemic hit, and
Mhm.
obviously that things changed for a lot of people. But part of my study, part of what I was really diving into was on positive, lasting behavior change. And really, the big shift for me came was in this big recognition of how people actually change effectively. And so much of the fitness paradigm is prescriptive, right? We're telling people what to do. When in actuality, a lasting behavior change comes from having an internal shift on your behavior. And that's where really the coaching paradigm kind of took over my practice. And of course, the other big lens shift was in the fitness space. I was trained that a lot of times you're looking for during the consult, like, okay, what are they doing wrong? What's their movement
Mhm.
thing? Where are their faults in their movement patterns? Where are they like messing up in their nutrition? And that was the lever that you tried to angle, right? To
Mhm.
sell your package. And that really was the paradigm I was trained in as a trainer. Whereas in a positive psychology lens, you're not looking at what's wrong with people, you're looking for what's right with people. And then how do we use that to help you get to where you want to go? And it was really this shift to focus
Mm.
on, I'm not going to tell my client in the consult everything they're doing wrong anymore. I'm going to praise their positives. I'm going to look for their strengths, their resilience, and their calling and purpose, which then gives them a reason to change from a positive lens. And so those are probably the biggest paradigm shifts that led me out of only working as a trainer in a fitness professional context, and now doing this much more holistic hybrid kind of
Mhm.
everything in the kitchen sink except for career.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, at least it makes sense to me, but I do wanna dig in a little bit. You said
That's good.
you evolved from the training, which I never did training. Like, I came from the corporate world. I was a manager, a coach, people leader. I think a lot of those aspects resonate, like what you say resonates with me, is like why people do what they do, and understanding that first is helpful. You went from a trainer to this other paradigm. I mean, was there a particular client that really helped you make that transition? Was it just bit by bit over time it happened?
Well, even when I came into grad school, I was coming in having already gotten certifications in nutrition, sleep, yoga,
Mhm,
meditation, mindfulness,
mhm.
NLP, motivational interviewing. Like, pick
Okay.
your thing. I had the piece of paper. It was just missing the positive psychology piece. And the clients I was working with at the time, I graduated in 2020. So I was finishing grad school in lockdown, writing my master's thesis in lockdown, and all of my clients had gone remote. And obviously we were all under this big pressure cooker of a massive, not self-imposed change. And a lot of the conversations we were having at the time were on resilience behaviors and burnout.
Mm,
And so really that suite of clients was a lot of the pivot for how do we build sustainable resilience that isn't a buzzword, but it actually is fostering the person that, a decade from now, when you look back on this time, who do you want to have been? How can you create that person with intentionality? And really, that was a lot of the incubator for what I'm doing now.
So isn't it amazing how the pandemic caused that for many of us? And working from home, you started to have all this special training and special interventions, and like at risk and high risk for retention. At least again from the corporate world, it sounds very similar. Where you started to focus on the individual well-being, but it was kind of given lip service in many contexts, or it was kind of this forced training.
Oh, yeah.
And what you're saying is right, that we don't want it to be a buzzword. You dived in and really understood that. Oh, that's awesome. As a coach, and we can get into what a coach is, because I know that's a whole thing.
That's the whole
um,
thing.
it's like I know what you mean when you're working with clients. You're like, they ask you a question. I'm not going to find the answer in this book over here about nutrition. There's this deeper thing going on that they need help with. So
Yeah.
just one more level deep on the field of applied positive psychology. The words are obvious, right? Linguistically, applied, something that you do, versus theory, and then positive as opposed to negative, right? Sounds great. How does that differ from traditional psychology, and why should we care about that distinction?
Yeah. So traditional psychology really focused on what's wrong with people, right? And no fault to the great
Mm,
grand poobahs of psychology. It really was because when you're looking at scientific disciplines, you got the hard sciences of things like chemistry, physics, mathematics. And so those early psychological practitioners wanted to be taken seriously. And at that time in that milieu, we're talking mostly about European educated affluent men. You weren't going to be taken seriously talking about love, right? You were going to be
mm.
taken seriously saying, we're going to solve the problems of the mind using a Western medical model, which was identify disease and correct it. And
S
that's really traditional psychology.
Yeah. I'm laughing because I'm just thinking, like, just the classic man woman paradigm.
Oh,
Me
and
and my
we
wife,
can get into some of that
like, you know what I'm
too.
saying? Like, my wife knows I always try to fix problems, and and try to be more empathetic, and not do that. Anyway, keep going.
Well, and I'm not throwing shade at that. Like,
Sure, sure.
that's a well-intentioned for any scientist, regardless of
Mhm,
discipline, that you identify a problem, you develop a hypothesis, you run experiments. But where we ended up by the mid 20th century was, okay, maybe we've got some like decent treatments for, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, right? The dysfunctions in the mind. But I know this was my experience with therapy in my 20s. Okay, the absence of all of the bad stuff. I've
mm,
mapped all the trauma. I've done all the cognitive behavioral therapy techniques. I can get myself to neutral gear. The absence of the bad stuff is not the same as the presence of the good stuff. So we took out all of the stuff. Now the bucket's empty. Well, what do we put in the bucket?
mm,
Positive psychology is the focus on all the things that are good with people. So I don't refer to it as the science of happiness. I refer to it as the science of well-being, human well-being, because There's so much more to a well-lived life. That's the phrase we're trying to get out
Mhm.
there.
Yeah.
There's so much more to a well-lived life than soft quoties here, happiness, because happiness is a state, just like sadness is a state. And happiness can come and go, but purpose, meaning, calling, love, you know, the ability to build a sustainable lifestyle that then supports me in actualizing on my purpose is so much richer. And that's really what positive psychology is about. When Martin Seligman, who's considered to be the founder of the field, but he's not the only one, they all are affluent white
Mhm.
guys, and also to their credit, have recognized the gap that that creates. And so we're trying to do better as a field. But Seligman, when UPenn offered to start a positive psychology program, he insisted that it had to be an applied program
Mm.
because you don't build well-being by thinking about it. And I always use the metaphor of the gym. You don't get stronger by thinking about lifting. You got to pick up the heavy stuff. You don't build well-being by thinking about, oh, these are all the things I should be grateful for. An effective gratitude practice, you're actually taking the time to pull up the emotional experience. And so
Mm.
just writing your 3 gratitude things is an exercise in obligation, not in cultivating an emotional state. So you have to do it for it to work, and that's where the applied piece really comes in.
That's great. So it's like the when we talk about holistic wellness, it sounds like positive psychology fits into the pie of
Yeah.
psychology to give you holistic psychology, I guess, right? Which is a piece of wellness. I mean, where does it fit into wellness overall if you were to make that into a big diagram or something?
It
Yeah.
depends whose model we use. So, my show is produced by NASM, the National Academy of Sports Medicine. I was one of the authors on their wellness coaching certification, and I'm very proud of it. They define it as mental, physical, and emotional betterment of life, as wellness as a whole. And then the tools of that being movement, nutrition, sleep, recovery and regeneration, and mental and emotional well being. If we're gonna make the pie metaphor, I would say positive psychology is the pan, if we include embodiment as part of the modality in positive psychology. Obviously, I'm a body person, that's primarily how I work
Mhm.
with people. Positive psychology for a long time focused only on the mental experience, and fortunately, one of the evolutions in the space has been to include the fact that, like, hey, we have a body,
Yeah.
and how you take care of it is gonna directly impact state, and more we're seeing that play out in the world. So I'm grateful to see it all evolve.
Yeah, we're not a disembodied brain. That actually sounds like a
No,
nightmare. But yes,
not into
we need
it.
all of our. Yeah, and it's funny because that again resonates. Like the language I sometimes use is this physical self mastery. How like to exist and function in the world, it is a physical world. So why wouldn't everything integrate with that in some way, even mentally, right?
Yeah.
So, all right, because sometimes people think of holistic in the foo-foo sense of it, right?
Woo
Yoga,
woo.
meditation, mindfulness, right? Woo. For others, it's maybe the more definition, the literal definition of whole, right? Everything,
Yeah.
integrated approach. So, I guess we talked about holistic wellness. So you mentioned actualization before. So when we talk about the mind and positive psychology and applying all of these practices, and then actualization, becoming more of, I guess, your aligned self is the way you've put it. Where do we go from there? So where do we take it and actually put it into practice? It's a broad
Yeah.
question. Yeah,
Well, I wanna circle back to the woo-woo thing,
sure, go for it,
because I
please.
do think that that's an important piece,
Yeah.
and where I settle on that, especially with a client, is around belief. You don't have to believe what I believe in order for us to have a meaningful conversation around belief, but that's gonna be an important mechanism when it comes to building your lifestyle, because your value system, your meaning making is all gonna come out of however you think all this works. And, you mentioned like yoga and meditation as kind of like a woo woo thing. But when we look at even the mechanisms of the nervous system and what something like meditation is doing in the nervous system, you don't have to believe in a higher power for
Mhm.
that whole skill set to be true. So there's fortunately all of these layers that we're getting to examine now, because we have the technology to look at things that 50 years ago were being poo-pooed as nonsense. So it's a very exciting time to be a practitioner in the space. And then you had asked me another question that I honestly don't remember what you asked me about.
Yeah, I wanted to get into like emergent actualization and
Oh, yeah.
upward spiraling. You want to we can jump
Yeah.
into that. So because what you I had never heard that term before, upward spiraling, right?
Yeah.
Which is again, linguistically, the opposite of downward spiraling. It's these positive feedback loops, right? To
Yep.
reinforce things, reinforce well-being, create momentum, build your resources, and so on. So explain the concept, how they help us be more resilient, perform better, and
All the
how we can
things,
do
why
it.
they
How
matter,
we can
why
do
you
it.
care,
Yeah.
why you care. And I love to just point out the difference between this and like some of the woo woo like wellness nonsense. And I
Mm,
was allergic to the word wellness. I
mm,
had no desire to be a wellness practitioner. When NASM approached me about contributing to their wellness coaching certification, it's essentially like, hey, we're building the thing that you always wanted to exist. Do you want to be a part of it? Oh, hey, you just have to swallow this pill. And I was like, okay, fine. I'll call it
mhm,
wellness. Um, but when we talk about upward spiraling, we're talking about integration, we're talking about actualization, we are talking about measurable effects in the human experience. And so, upward spirals specifically are when you take two or more phenomenon in someone's life, two or more interventions or practices, whatever we want to call them, and they create a positive feedback loop that is building, whether we call it capacity, we call it resilience, there's all these different ways that we can measure it. But we'll take, for example, a meditation practice, like a mindfulness practice, and a positive emotional priming practice. So this would be something like you're doing morning meditation, you're doing evening gratitude. And because of the morning meditation is increasing your mindfulness and the gratitude is affecting your default mode network, construct in the brain, you start sleeping better and your mood is improving. And now, because you're sleeping better and your mood is improving, it's easier to meditate longer. Your gratitude practice is getting richer. So you're sleeping better, your mood is improving, you're feeling so much better, your relationships improve. Now you're
mm,
communicating better because you have more self-awareness. And there's I want to say there's 2 dozen documented upward spirals, but there's many theorized that we just haven't gotten the funding or the research to go out and measure yet being the operant. Where my work comes in, what I wrote my master's thesis on was the way in which these upward spirals, which have been measured in the short term, integrate with one another and creating compounding positive effects toward sustainable lifestyle change, right? What does lifestyle transformation actually look like? And what I found in my work was when we take something like Maslow's peak experiences, right? These are your big touchstones, the birth of a child, standing at the edge of the Grand Canyon and experiencing your own smallness, going to space, right? The Overwatch effect is one of my favorite things to research. This is
mhm,
what happens to an astronaut going to space for the first time, and they have this profound feeling of awe and wholeness and oneness with all of humanity, and then they end up coming back and like starting nonprofits and doing
mm,
like completely divergent work from where they were before because of that profound self-transcendent experience. And when I talk about actualization, when I talk about wellness for integration, what I'm talking about is the way in which our wellness practices, our self development practices, leadership development, whatever work we're doing within ourselves is really looking for what's the next lesson, what's the next important skill set that I'm going to integrate into my lifestyle in a sustainable way so that I can serve my purpose, my calling, whatever that is right now, and also recognize that I'm continuing to grow as a person.
mm.
So oftentimes when I have conversations about actualization, people think it's like one thing. And it's never going to be one thing because you are in an emergent experience of your life. And as that horizon continues to grow back, you're going to have new and exciting experiences of actualization if you allow yourself to keep growing in that way.
Okay,
So
so you
that's the
yeah,
big kit and
yeah.
caboodle.
No, no, you explained it really well because I've heard it talked about once or twice and kind of understood where you were going, but I always like to get very concrete for people, especially, selfishly, how can I use this to help people in my practice as
Yeah,
well?
of course.
And I remember taking actually a friend of mine, her name is Stephanie Caputo, and she and her husband have a company. They do there's something called Navigating Life, and it had these three spiral, they call them spirals, and they were overlapping, and one was relationship, one was physical, and then one was another, and I can't remember. It was the same concept of, you're not gonna improve everything at once, and it's not a switch, right? And pick the things that are that maybe you have strengths, and pick the things that are the big go gets maybe, and kind of work on those, and then as they improve, the other ones get brought up. So you mentioned 12, or you said 2 dozen. There's 2 dozen of these. Like there's actual things that are upward
Oh, yeah.
spirals. Like, so give me an example of one specific one.
So mood and self-directed physical activity. So especially if you do it
Okay.
with other people. So choosing a physical activity that you enjoy, we know that within the next 24 hours, you're more likely to say good things happened, and you'll say more good things happened in 24 hours after you engage in some kind of physical activity. Well, because of that, like literal increased sensitivity to positive experience. We can now measure it. When the initial tests, when the initial research were done on that effect, we couldn't measure it yet. Now we can measure that physical activity makes you more sensitive to your own serotonin through the endocannabinoid system. So, okay, you're more sensitive to your own serotonin. You, Philip, my new friend, are being nice to me. I'm going to have a mood boost. Now, because I'm in a better mood, I'm more likely to repeat it again tomorrow. Now I continue that positive effect of being like high on my own serotonin supply.
Mm,
That's an upward spiral dynamic,
got it.
right? Because I'm in a better mood, I'm going to be looking for more opportunities to continue to grow and improve. There's upward spirals between meditation, mindfulness, and relationships. There, I'm trying to pop them off the top of my head. I didn't have them ready. And two
No, no,
dozen
I
was a
love those.
spitball. I'm just thinking of like, okay, what are the upward spirals I know? It's probably about 2 dozen, but that number might be wrong. I don't want anybody to go hunt and be like, she said it was 2 dozen and it's only 18. Like the
Yeah,
internet
no,
could
I
be
didn't mean
great
that. What was
sometimes.
interesting was that it was this concrete list that we
Oh
were starting
yeah,
to compile, which then, of course, my brain goes to, okay, now let me see that list, and then we can sort of
sure.
work on the checklist of things with
Well,
people.
let me
Yeah.
plug a few things then for
Go ahead.
you.
Yep.
The books are Barbara Fredrickson is the world leading researcher on positive emotional experience. The broaden and build theory of positive emotion is the foundational work that then upward spirals grew out of. Her books are positive. I think it's positivity. Hold on a second. Yep. So positivity and love 2.0. My master's thesis was on all of the stuff I'm talking about. So if you literally just search like UPenn positive psychology, Darlene Marshall capstone, um, it'll come up. You can download it and go nerd out super hard, along
Awesome.
with
Well,
all the theories about how this stuff works.
I'll tell you, your stuff is going to be in my stuff before long, because this is really connecting with me, and I think a lot of people listening are like, oh, this it's a big missing piece, and it's
Yeah.
not that we don't do this to some extent and not know what to call it, right? There is some of that. Like I see all the time with clients where one thing leads to another, and all of a sudden just everything in their life is a win because these other things are now no longer giving them the stress or holding them back, and it's incredible to watch, right? But to be able to actually induce that, right,
Yeah.
that's where the power comes in. So
And
you
that's
yeah,
And
go
that's what
ahead.
that work is about, and I'll just throw this out there. So the 3 things I start every client with in order to prime, and I'm happy to unpack the science underneath each of these practices, in order to prime the effect is some kind of appreciation or gratitude practice every day, 20 minutes of moderate intensity cardiovascular exercise to increase their sensitivity to their own serotonin and upregulate their brain-derived neurotrophic factor, and a mindfulness practice, some kind of meditation. So what I'm trying to prime there is not only their malleability to change, but also the positive emotional priming, because we know that someone in a positive emotional experience is more open to new information. They have more neural flexibility. They have greater self-regulation. They're more likely to explore. They're more curious. Like there's all of these things that happen when someone's in a positive emotional state.
Hmm.
Not that challenging emotional states aren't useful, and they can be, but positive emotional states have a different effect in the brain and the nervous system that lend themselves toward the self work. So,
Okay.
by getting clients to start with that flexibility, everything else that we want to come next, they're leveraged into the upward spiral effect.
And are those 3 habits that you gradually build in the first few weeks? Is that the idea, or these are 3 things you do every day right off the bat?
Most clients, this is the one place
Yeah.
that I tend to be prescriptive. Most
Right.
clients, if they're not already doing them, that's a prescription that
Cool.
comes right out of the consult. Like, okay, you're going to work with me.
Cool.
I want you to do these things between now and our next meeting
Love it.
so
Love it.
that they're more flexible.
And here's just a little thought that popped in my head, right? We like to say people have personalities, and some people are more positive than others, optimistic than others. And
Yeah.
again, I will use that labeling myself and like feel like
Sure.
I've always been a positive, optimistic person who just brushes off things. And yet when I look back at it, I know it's because of my environment. There's the social psychology aspect to it, the opportunities I was given as a child, my family, and so on. What do you think of that concept? And where I'm going with this is it's got to be easier for some people to do this, right? When you
Oh yeah,
start with them
yeah.
potentially, and how does that play into it, or do we just is it pretty much the same approach no matter who you are? It just might be easier for some people.
Um, how technical of an answer do you
Oh,
want?
I love technical. Whether the
Okay.
listener stays tuned, I'll see my Apple stats later.
So we're getting theoretical a little bit. We know that we all have a certain bandwidth of well-being and disposition towards, thriving, right? Some people are Eeyores, some people are piglets,
Hmm,
and some people are everywhere in between. Um, Optimism and pessimism, we think in the positive psychology space, are not personality traits. They're what we call explanatory style. It's the lens that you are looking through on the things that happen to you. So pessimists in that context are looked at as when something goes wrong, is it they view it as permanent, pervasive, and personal. So this sucks. It's always gonna suck. It's because everything sucks and it's because I suck. Whereas the optimistic explanatory style looks at it like, um, okay, this sucks, but not everything sucks. It won't always suck, and stuff happens to people. It's not anything wrong with me. And so
hmm,
when we think about optimism, pessimism in the positive psychology space, it's less about like that bandwidth I'm talking about that we all kind of had. Now, on the upward spiral side, when we're talking, like you said, some people this stuff is easier for, it's more accessible. The theory is that the way that upward spirals work is you have something called vantage sensitivity. How much sensitivity do you have that you can take advantage when the good stuff happens, right? The same thing happens to Piglet and Eeyore. Eeyore is going,
hmm,
"Oh," and Piglet's like, "Whatever," right?
mhm,
So, your vantage sensitivity is directly related to something called vantage resources. Do you have the mindset, the emotional social support, your foundational needs met, all of the factors that go into a lifestyle that support you to take that, what we call a capitalization opportunity? Can you take advantage of the good thing emotionally and neurochemically? Now, like you
hmm,
said, we don't necessarily know why some people are more of a piglet than an Eeyore, but we also know that if we teach the Eeyore certain skills, give them access to whether we're talking about relationship support or community organizations, psychological skills, reframing techniques, get them moving their bodies. There's all these things that we can do for the Eeyore that increases their vantage sensitivity. Now, do they end up
hmm,
in the same place as Piglet? Not all of us, but expecting them to is also toxically positive. And really, from my lens as a coach, it's what does Eeyore want for Eeyore?
hmm.
If Eeyore is okay with who they are, I don't
Fair
need
enough.
to force it onto them like a moral obligation. But if they want my help, I'm here to do it.
Fair enough. Yeah, that relative change. You're right. Yeah, this is great. This is good stuff. I think this is awesome, Darlene. Wow. Okay, I'm taking a ton of notes because this is
And
awesome.
take it. This is fun.
Um,
I'm down.
and you talked about the habit priming, and I don't know if we already addressed this, but you said you talked about Barbara Fredrickson. I think you mentioned the fMRI studies on one of your other shows, how that show how the positive emotions affect the body differently than negative emotions, right?
Yeah.
Neurological flexibility, broaden and build. So how does that pathway work and contribute toward the upward spiraling?
Yeah, so there's actually the foundation for upward spirals. And so the
Okay.
deal, if we take it to from an evolutionary psychology approach, we all have something called negativity bias. And it's because our ancestors were the ones who, when a threat presented
Hmm.
itself, they were looking out for that threat and then they never forgot it. And the ones who were kind of like, whatever, weren't likely to survive and reproduce because they were more likely to be, susceptible to a repeated threat. So, from an evolutionary psychology standpoint, that negativity bias, we're more likely to think about all the negative stuff, but negative emotions narrow our focus, right?
Hmm.
And
Yes.
that is also an evolutionary benefit, right? The tiger comes over the hill, and we all have to be ready to respond. The problem is now we're not living in that world because that kind of challenging emotional response is very intensively stressful to the nervous system and therefore the entire body, right? Your autonomic nervous system,
Mhm.
your vagus nerve, it is innervating all of your autonomic nervous system function. So everything automatic that we don't have control of. So blood sugar and hormones and heart rate and I think blood pressure. I didn't say that one yet.
Mhm.
And kind of everything else in between. And so that upregulated stress condition is not that great for us. It narrows our focus. We're looking for threats. The flip side of that positive emotional experience, our pupils constrict so that we are not so alert to threat. Our blood pressure comes down, resting heart rate relaxes. There's all of these physiological changes. But on the psych side, you have less uh, subconscious biases.
Hmm.
You're more curious, you're more creative, you're a better problem solver. You're more likely to explore your environment. It's easier to make friends, it's easier to learn new material because in times of calm, that's when we would be bonding, that's when we would be exploring, that's when you would be learning new skills. You're not going to learn new skills with the tiger coming over the hill, but we're going to, you're going to teach me cool stuff when we're all just hanging out. And so that also has a significant reparative function to the nervous system and the tissues of the body because now all of those baseline processes that happen when you're in your parasympathetic, your calm state of your nervous system are kicking in when you feel the positive emotional
Hmm.
experiences. So that is the broaden, right? I'm broadening my cognition. Build is learning skills and resources. Broaden and build theory is the foundation for upward spiraling.
Okay. Love it. Yeah. So and that was a spiraling effect you just talked about with the
Yeah.
positive experiences causing you to relax, making you more creative, and one thing leads to another.
Shout out to Felipe. I know Philip for a long time, and I know how passionate he is about healthy eating and body strength, and that's why I chose him to be my coach. I was no stranger to dieting and body training, but I always struggled to do it sustainably. Philip helped me prioritize my goals with evidence-based recommendations while not overstressing my body and not feeling like I'm starving. In 6 months, I lost 45 pounds without drastically changing the foods I enjoy, but now I have a more balanced diet. I weight train consistently, but most importantly, I do it sustainably. If a scientifically sound, healthy diet and a lean, strong body is what you're looking for, Philip Pape is your guy.
To be a little negative here, what if you take somebody who's on the opposite extreme, who's really struggling with a lot of things? They're very negative about themselves. They're making excuses, things are holding themselves back. And there's reasons for these, right? In people's lives, usually they might be overwhelmed. They're busy with life, family, kids, career, whatever.
Yeah.
Or they've tried a lot of things and they think they're applying themselves over the years, and then those things don't work, right? Which is just
Yeah.
reinforces this. So where would you start that conversation or the process to move them toward that actualization, I guess is the word?
Yeah. So the first thing I always like to throw out in a conversation like that is the recognition that a coach, a positive psychology practitioner, a personal trainer, we are not clinicians.
Mhm.
And very often, when we are working with someone in a state like that, they may have untreated mental health considerations. And making sure, and I am very direct with my clients about scope of practice and the recognition that one, if we bump up the edge of the scope and I'm worried about you, I'm going to tell you that you need to go to therapy, or I'm
Mhm.
not going to continue working with you. Um, or they're already working with a therapist, and I make sure their therapist knows that I exist and I
Mm.
respect them and all of that.
Sure.
And so there's that piece of so often the struggle bus and the overwork and the hyperproductivity is reactive to some kind of unprocessed trauma or mental health consideration, right? Why would we want to create a life that burns us out, right?
Mhm.
So it starts there from my perspective. Now, if you've got somebody who's already working with a therapist and then we enter that conversation and they're on the struggle bus and they feel overwhelmed and they feel overstimulated and it always comes back to what is it that matters most to you, my client? What is your purpose, meaning, calling? Why are you here? Why work with me now? And if they can give me that information, I can help them make better choices about who they want to be when they grow up because they're working with me for a reason. They
Yeah, I was gonna
want
say that. They
change.
reached out to you, they took that step, yes.
Right. So they want change. There has to be some vision of something else they want, or they would not have reached out, or if they reach out and there's nothing there, they wouldn't have gotten past the consult.
Mhm, mhm,
So they're going to be feeding me, what is it that you're here to do? What is it that you want for you? What is the example you want to set for your kids? What is the change you're trying to make in the world? What is your leadership, your mission? And anything else, to me, all of the lifestyle stuff is in service of that, for it not
okay,
to, just be narcissism.
fair enough. Okay, so then where do these so then we're talking a little bit also about ideas like agency, empowerment, right? Taking control of your life and so on. Where do these concepts comport with those, which are the opposite of codependence, right? And I know we're talking when we talk about coaching and training and all that, we don't want that. We don't want a codependent relationship. We want what you're talking about here. So maybe explore that a little bit, Darlene.
Yeah, sure. I think, what you're talking about is the difference between codependence and interdependence,
Mm,
right?
yeah.
And I'm a strong believer that an effective lifestyle practitioner should not be trying to like bootstrap some codependence in their client,
Hmm.
which is not what I was taught. As a trainer, I was taught it's always easier to keep a client than get a client. And so you try to keep the clients forever. And the people who stay with
Mm,
clients forever are the most effective people. And really, I'm like, if after 3 years of working with me, you can't work out on your own, I am not good at my
yeah.
job,
Yep.
because my
Agree.
job is to empower you with
Hmm.
information. Now, if we find that that same person just knows that this is the right thing to do and they cannot find truly authentic internal motivation, okay, then let's create accountability structures. And that's different than I'm trying to trick you into renewal, which
Sure.
is again what I was taught as a trainer. And the reason is that if I'm truly helping someone like walk the path to their authentic self, actualize on their purpose and meaning and calling, they won't need me after a certain point because they'll have learned everything that they were meant to learn. And then they're going to go, with whatever their belief system is. Um, and if not, there's some other resistance there, and I just wasn't, like, the magic practitioner, and that's okay, right? Not everything works for everyone all the time is one of the most important things I try to put out there. If any practitioner tells you they have the perfect answer, just do my 5-point system, my
Oh
10-point
yeah.
system, my 3-step system.
Oh yeah.
Run, because not everything works for everyone all the time. And no one practitioner has all of the answers for everyone. And if they think they do, they're actually just a narcissist.
Yes, and did that happen so can you recall a time where that happened to you where perhaps at the end of it all, you realized that you couldn't be the magic practitioner and
Oh,
then
yeah.
learn from it and
Oh,
maybe
yeah, of
then
course.
integrate of course, yep.
Of course. I mean, it's happened how I don't know how many
Every
times I
client
couldn't.
almost, yeah.
Oh god, no,
There's something no, I
not
mean,
every
I guess you
client.
learned something from working with every client, but
Oh,
not to
sure,
that
but
level, yeah,
specifically the
yeah,
failures, like,
yeah,
if you've got a big coaching audience, I'm happy to talk about accepting and learning from and then moving on from the failures. And I know a thing or three about helping people.
mhm,
And there have unquestionably been clients that I sit down with my notebook and I look back at and I go, okay, what did I get wrong? And without the sense of ownership that it was it's my work, it's their work. But maybe it's the recognition that, you know what, I should never have accepted that renewal.
sure,
I knew that we were on the wrong path. They asked to stay and I let them stay, and I never should have accepted that renewal. I
yep,
should have referred them out. Or I knew 6 months before that I didn't wanna be doing that kind of work anymore, and it was the pandemic, and
sure,
I was worried
little
about money
rational,
and
yeah, yeah,
bingo, and so I did it, but I wasn't aligned. And every time there has been a part of me that knew that we weren't it, but I kept pushing because I tried to convince
mm,
myself. And I think
sure,
one of the big lessons for me and one of the big lessons for every client is that there is a voice inside of you that you know is your authentic voice. There are things about yourself that you know to be true if you are honest with yourself. And when that voice says you shouldn't be doing this anymore, listen to it.
there you go.
It's not a failure. It's just the next step.
Yeah, and I think that even applies to the other side, right? If you're listening and thinking
Yeah.
of working with someone, and it's your job to interview them, right, and hold them accountable to what you want, and
Yes.
make sure you ask them the questions that would set off any red flags for you. And if don't try to force the coach into doing what maybe isn't their thing for you, and vice versa, right? That's yeah, that speaks to me as well, because I definitely can think of some clients that I should never have taken on, but you're like, well,
Yeah.
they're super eager, so we'll work it out.
Yeah.
Cool. So, a couple other topics I want to dive into. What are your thoughts about the fake it till you make it phenomenon? Right, the idea of, I guess, manufacturing confidence to push through an obstacle, come out the other side, and then incrementally build your natural confidence.
Oh, it's funny. I thought when you were saying "fake it till you make it" that you were referencing something else.
Well, that's okay. Tell me what you think you're
No, that's
also,
okay.
yeah.
Well, I just, there's a lot of people out on the interwebs who use the word coach that aren't
Mm,
trained as coaches
let's get
and
into that
aren't
one.
qualified. Yeah, we can play this game. Which direction would
Thank
we
you,
want to
Carl,
go?
for telling me.
Level it up,
Uh,
Carl.
yeah. Well, let's just be real about it, right? So the word coach has a definition. Let's define that. Let's define what is not a coach, but also the idea that people who are not coaches, let's make them aware of that and how they could become better coaches in the context of what you're talking about here. So there we go.
Yeah.
That's a positive way to approach it.
Yeah, let's flip it. So, let's recognize there's two usage of the word coach, right? There's like my nephew's basketball team
Mm,
and his coach. That's a coach. Great. There's coaches in all level of sport. And the rest of us out here using the word coach are talking about individuals who are educated in the skill set of holding space, asking good questions, making an informative paradigm with their clients, or giving them good information, and then empowering the client to make good decisions for their own progress toward their own self-directed goals. A coach is not being prescriptive, right? A coach will give information and then they get out of the way. They might give guidance, they might give a particular shape, but that's what coaching really is. Working through ambivalence, working through resistance, helping people get unstuck, but not by saying this is exactly what you do, right?
mhm,
That's the prescriptive model. If that's not what you're doing, you're not coaching. And no shade on other modalities of change, but that's not coaching, it's something else. And so I mentioned I come from the fitness industry, like personal training is not coaching. And even working within the corporate setting I was in, you'd get to a certain level and they'd start calling you a coach
mm,
because they wanted to charge more money for your work, but you're still making a prescription with everything you're doing. You're telling them what to do.
mhm,
So it wasn't coaching, it was training. And I see a lot of trainers out in the world who you get a certain amount of certifications and you want to distinguish yourself from other newer trainers. And so you start using the label coach. The problem is it creates a ton of confusion in the market. People end up not understanding the difference. And then they pay for something thinking they're going to get one thing and they get the other and then they're upset. And so I have fallen into this pit. I have clients I have referred to someone because I thought they were coaching and then they turned it
mm.
out making prescriptions and that's not what I wanted for that client. And so it is a pet peeve of mine. I'll own that I'm attached to
Yeah.
it. It just grinds my gears.
Yeah, now let's play devil's advocate, because earlier you mentioned there is something you prescribe, and that is those 3
Yeah.
habits. And then
It lasts about
also,
2 weeks.
yeah, yeah, no, and that's okay, but that's context. And there's
Yeah.
also my interpretation of what you're saying a little bit is meeting the individual and understanding what they want. They're asking for something, then you can guide them. But you do have to give them information, and giving information. So for example, if someone very simply just wants a nutrition plan, right? Not a meal plan, but just they want to understand, how do I go from here to here, lose fat, right? Just a very simple, practical thing. And you have to get them in that calorie deficit to do that. So is providing guidelines for how to do that and targets prescriptive and not coaching, even though you're coaching them on how to stick to that and how to do all the things to get there?
In my opinion, yes, because as somebody who's been a nutrition coach for 10 years, additive nutrition coaching is not a prescriptive protocol.
Mhm.
But there are also times that someone's working toward an outcome that requires a prescriptive protocol, right? I got friends who are competitive fighters and bodybuilders and rugby players, and you got to make weight. So if you got to make weight, you need a prescription. That's when you need a really effective expert practitioner who is a trainer or a nutritionist specialized in those ways. But that's not coaching a process. That's
Mhm.
prescribing a paradigm. And again, I'm not demonizing doing that. I'm just
Of
saying, like,
course.
can we use the word for the thing we mean?
Yeah, I'm trying to understand where there's like a hybrid in there, which kind of seems like there's
Well,
a where you're
well, I'll
doing
throw that out
both,
there.
right? Yeah.
I do both.
Yeah.
Many of my clients are hybrid clients where I'm like, okay, we got two hats here. And when we get to your movement, if what you want is prescriptive movement protocol because your movement screening is showing significant dysfunction and I need you to do these, and but they consent to it, right? I
Mhm.
am transparent with them about the difference between coaching and training. And when they say, yeah, that would be amazing. Could you train me? And then I'm writing their exercise protocol so that we get that specific outcome. That's when prescriptive is appropriate. But it's also not coaching. That's a hybrid coach trainer model. And that is how I run my business.
Love that. Yeah. And you made me think about a book. I wish I could remember the name of it. It's about asking for feedback. I don't know if you've heard this book before.
Hmm.
And it distinguishes like three types of feedback that you want from someone. That the important thing is, do you need to ask for the feedback you want? Don't rely on somebody else to guess at what you need.
Yeah.
And coaching is one of those. And but there were like two other types, and it kind of sounds like a similar categorization as you're giving me here. It's interesting. Yeah, I was reflecting on that even ever since Carl brought it up as well. That I know some of my clients where we have a prescription for say macros, but then they learn the process and can do it themselves after a while. We don't even talk about it anymore. And I'm like, that's an interesting. It's kind of like one shifting into another. And then meanwhile, all these other things having nothing to do with the prescription seem to be where people get hung up, the behavioral stuff, the change, the
Yeah.
whatever. So it's
Well,
fascinating philosophically. Yeah.
and yeah, like I think you're leading into what I want to say is like, this is my opinion, right? Like
Sure. Yeah.
it's it's all made up by people anyway, right?
Yeah.
We're making up words and
We're
slapping them onto stuff. It's all a construct that we
sure.
invented and we get to evolve and change. And my argument is just like, hey, wouldn't it be better if we were being specific about the thing that we say we're doing and like not just everybody is suddenly a coach even though you have no education in facilitating meaningful
Agree.
behavior change? And the flip of that is coming from the fitness space, a lot of fitness industry education and behavior change is just outdated and wrong. And
Yeah.
so then you're working off of paradigms that aren't effective, calling yourself a coach.
Right.
So that's my argument.
No, I love it. And there's a transparency element and there's the trying to make money off of these things and these labels and certs and but
Yeah,
credentials you have behind your name. And it's not like we could all just stop people from being hucksters. That's like humanity's always kind of been like that. But
yeah,
those of us who want to do better and learn and hopefully are listening to this podcast and to your stuff can at least start to describe it more precisely. And as we have our sales calls or our discovery calls or talk on our podcast, it's like make a distinction between those. So, which I will be doing more now after learning this from you. So there you go. You made an impact. Um, okay. So what else do we want to cover? Oh, your podcast. Your podcast. I like the premise, right, of examining ancient traditions and modern science, and it strikes me as it's like the parallels between evidence-based science and anecdotal experience or common sense, like
yeah.
which you discussed I think on your episode on additive nutrition is what I was referring to. How do you balance those perspectives? So separating like the fringe ideas of from ancient traditions, and maybe I'm using the word fringe in a loaded way, uh, that might actually work, things that work but aren't really considered evidence-based because they're rooted in ancient traditions.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I think, first off, like let's just layer on there's so much appropriation in the wellness space, right? Like there's a lot and as a middle-aged white woman, I got to own, you know, respect for whatever culture or lineage we might be using as inspiration or
Mhm.
influence in a particular practice. Um Obviously, alignment yoga, it's an Iyengar derivative. That is a big base of my entry into these alternative
Hmm.
ways of thinking that we're now just really starting to measure and understand in more and more nuanced ways. And meditation is such a perfect example where within our lifetime, I'm making some assumptions about your age, within our lifetime, it's really gone from this like esoteric woo woo thing to totally mainstream with a ton of research. And we can thank the Dalai Lama, and we can thank John Kabat-Zinn, and all of the hippies for having brought those practices back, and then we examine them. And so a lot of times, what I'm trying to do is really look at, well, what is this thing that we think of as kind of woo? Where is the science underneath the thing that
Hmm.
most people think of as kind of woo? And upward spirals is a perfect example. It sounds really hippy dippy, and
Hmm.
in actuality, it's measurable effects. And in terms of, like the additive nutrition thing, really that comes out of the recognition that people get a lot more nutritional traction. They make more progress longer and sustain it longer. I said that all in the wrong order. When you focus more on putting in the good stuff instead of
Right.
removing all the
Oh
things
yeah.
that have been demonized. And it's really
So
that
good.
simple. And so when I first start the nutrition conversation with my clients, I don't give them a list of all the foods they're going to avoid.
Right.
That is useless. And their next birthday party or the weekend, heck, I got a client right now who her doctor gave her a single printout sheet of her new diet and no support in actualizing on it. And she said to me, she's like, I'm not starting this till Monday. Sunday's Mother's Day and my birthday's this week. Like, why would I do this? I'm like, great.
Yep.
Can I just get you to eat more protein, please?
Yep. Oh yeah.
Um,
Protein. Yeah.
so specifically from the additive nutrition piece, it's just how do we apply what we know about behavior change and the human experience? And what we know is that people are not getting enough of the right things in the right ways. Yet we're all just talking about how evil sugar is all the time.
Hmm.
And the more you demonize, like it's the pink elephant thing, right? When I was trying to quit smoking and I just kept thinking about how badly I wanted a cigarette, that was totally different than when I filled my life up with enough positive
Hmm.
things that I no longer needed the stress relief of the cigarette, right? This is
Yeah.
going back 15 years.
Yeah. No, for sure. And there's a parallel there between positive versus negative, or positive versus traditional psychology as well. And I'm seeing these constant
Bingo.
themes of
Yeah.
focusing on the positive, whatever we mean by that. And the idea, and I use that same analogy with the protein of when you try to get enough protein, it starts to crowd other things out. You just can't help it, right? And when you go to
Yeah.
the grocery store and look for protein, you end up being on the outside of the store because that's where all the protein is. So I hear what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dig it.
Yeah, yeah, no, I dig it too. It's pretty cool. And the fringe, these what we think are fringe ideas or hippy dippy or whatever, when you could actually validate them with science and show how they work. There was a guy on my podcast. It hasn't come out yet. Oh, what's his name? Christopher. Can't forget his last name, but he basically is Eastern medicine, traditional medicine, and
Mhm.
like meridians and some of that. And I have my
Yeah.
skepticism meter is so high on that
Oh, let's
stuff.
talk about it. Let's talk about it.
Oh, you want to talk about it? I wasn't even going to ask about it, but yeah, no, and the way he described it, I'm like thinking, well, there's something there with the nervous system and muscles and everything
And
else that I,
fascial lines.
yeah, and yeah, exactly. That
Like
does seem to
so
make sense.
many of
Yeah,
the main meridians
yeah,
track with what we now understand to be fascial lines.
yeah.
And in 2018, Dr. Neil Thies published his research showing that fascia is actually an organ in the interstitium. And so along the interstitium, things like vibration and sound and light travel further than other connective tissue structures.
Oh, the physics
So
of it. Okay.
right. So
Yeah.
we're just starting to measure what the interstitium can do in a way that allopathic medicine, Western medicine can quantify. And part of what makes Neil Thies brilliant as a practitioner, his book Notes on Complexity comes out this week. Um, is he's also a Zen Buddhist in addition to being one of the world's leading liver pathologists.
Mm,
And so he's bringing that influence into trying to show Western medicine that there's much bigger scope than we are
love it.
necessarily
Yeah.
taking into account. But like the meridian lines follow interstitium
Mm.
like main lines. And I guarantee you in our lifetime, we're going to have better ways to measure what that's really on about.
Awesome.
And I could go on and on about like prana versus chi versus your mitochondria, and essentially this idea that these traditions that are so much older than Western paradigms were using their vernaculars to try to explain something that they could observe, but they didn't yet have the technology to measure. And add to that, our most advanced physicists understand that we can measure about 5% of the phenomena in the
Mm.
universe, right?
That's where it's
So,
good. That's true. We know very little. So
right.
yeah.
If we can only measure 5% of the observable universe as we experience it, there's all kinds of stuff that we don't know. And what I do when it comes to an application with my clients, the placebo effect is still in effect. I don't care if that's placebo. I care, did it make you more better? And
Did
did
it
it
work?
move you toward the thing that
Yeah.
you
Did it
wanted?
work? Yeah.
Who cares
Yeah.
if it's placebo?
I agree. I agree. There's a lot of things like that. We just do them, they work, and we don't understand them, and that's okay.
Exactly.
That's okay. Women's health. I don't even want to get into it. I'm just saying I'm thinking of a lot of parallels with women's health and what we don't know,
Oh,
and the
heck yes.
gaslighting and everything goes on because I have women in my life and clients that have dealt with that. It's just terrible. But
Yeah.
there's hope when you talk about, uncovering some of the mysteries as we go along.
Yeah.
Okay, so do you have a couple more minutes?
Sure. Let's go.
Okay. I wanted to ask what your favorite personal episode of your podcast is, just to help you like plug it a little, but also I want to understand what your favorite theme or episode is of your
You just
long running
asked me to
podcast.
pick my favorite toe. Like,
Well, pick one or a theme. That was part two, or a theme that you keep coming
okay, cool.
back
I was
to.
like, I can't tell you my
Yeah,
favorite
yeah. I
episode.
hear it.
It's
I
like
couldn't either. So
picking
you're
my
right. Not.
favorite eyelash. Like,
It's a tough
how
question.
would I? It's well, because it's such an
Yeah,
extension of my self conception, and
I
when it
get it.
comes to being like Coach Darlene. I think the cool thing about the show is how much it's evolved. So I started the show originally in February of 2020 when NASM invited me onto their podcast network. We had to do a reboot because I had been cursing in all of the previous episodes and they
Okay.
didn't want me to swear on the network. Okay, fine. I'll take
Oh,
again,
so
like
that's a lot of
I'll take that
repression right
pill.
there for you, right? Not swearing.
Actually, I've originally the plan was to have you seen The Good Place?
Yeah, love that
Okay.
show.
The
Yeah, with
plan
Kristen
was
Bell.
to
Yeah, yeah.
like the way they do curtsing on The Good Place,
Oh,
where
with
it's
weird
like,
words, made up words.
yeah,
Yeah.
weird words that had the same leading letter. So that was originally my plan. I was like, no, but it would make it too obvious. So anyway,
Mm,
so we had to do a reboot on the show. It's now been on their network for a year. So we're just had our 50th episode on the network. But originally, it was really going to be, like you say, ancient wisdom, modern science through a well being lens, the fitness industry, and all that. And then the pandemic hit. And so the first 2 years of the show were really focused on like, what is the emergent thing that we're all experiencing right now?
mm,
And how could I give you tools to help with it? And then as we came out of the pandemic and now we're moving into who are we now? How do we take these major forces of the human experience, like species level challenges, learn from them, integrate, and step forward. And this recognition that as millennials, young Gen X, millennials, like we're the adults in the room now. We get a say. So if we're the adults in the room, what are we going to do with it? And how
mm,
do we do it in a holistic, positive, additive way in a world that has a lot of challenges? And so, how do we dismantle some of the toxic stuff that we've been given? Obviously, the fitness and wellness spaces have a lot of that.
mhm,
And so, one of the things that we're doing right now is a series with one of the program directors at NASM. So he runs the teams that are pulling together the new courses. They're kind of cultivating the educational materials that NASM produces. Well, he's been on the show so he's about to come in again next month. So we're getting a clip of like every 6 weeks or so he comes on the show and he's done a full deep dive literature review into a topic that's controversial in the fitness industry, and we talk about why the conventional wisdom is wrong.
mhm.
So we just did
Okay.
fat bias in public health. The next one we're going to do is on BMI. We did one in January on why is dieting actually bad?
Mhm,
Why is everything you think you know? I mean, even in this conversation, Philip, you mentioned caloric restriction and changing body composition. What most people think that means is actually detrimental. to
Mhm.
their long-term well-being and doesn't actually work, but we've been taught to think it does. So that whole episode is him going through all the scientific evidence and us talking through it in a way that would empower the listener to make better choices.
Cool.
So yeah, the show's evolved a lot, and it's been really fun to do that.
Yeah, I love that you answered the question that way, telling us the whole story of how it's changed. Because my podcast is only a year, or what is it now, a year and a half, and even in that short time, it's just amazing
Yeah.
how things go. And the skepticism, my mission is also to kind of put the skeptical lens on, and you're ramping it up for me here, which I love. Like, really challenging it, made me think. You
It's
also
my
perfectly
jam.
guessed my age when you said Gen X millennial, so you got it right.
I was assuming we're the same
I was
age.
born in 1980, so it's probably right in there.
83.
Yeah, there
This
you
is
go.
my 40 year,
Yeah. Oh, congrats, Brad.
I
Happy birthday.
guess. Thanks.
Um, and then take each species level challenges and learn. I love the ambition and
Oh,
everything.
yeah.
It's great. This is awesome. Good stuff. So, second to last question I ask all guests, Darlene, and that is, what one question did you wish I had asked, and what is your answer?
I had my answer for this, and you actually ended up asking it.
Oh, look at that. I love when that happens.
So I've got a new one.
Okay.
I think one of the most important conversations we need to be having as a species, as a especially in the technologically advanced countries, is about loneliness. We are experiencing a loneliness epidemic that we are only just beginning to understand the ramifications of, the mental health crisis that we are having. But a lot of it is due to the lack of feeling authentic connection and compassion and open heartedness to one another. And it sounds really woo, except there is very hard science on this. I did do an episode on loneliness in the middle of the winter, and I encourage, if you're going to listen to anything, go back and listen to that one, um, because the physical, emotional, and mental health ramifications of loneliness are profound. It is more impactful than diabetes and smoking, but we shrug it off like it's NBD.
Mm,
And there was a very cute study that came out earlier this year that showed that what reaching out to your friends that you haven't talked to in a long time, you anticipate that they're not going to care. In actuality, they get this huge boost.
mm.
So if you take one thing away from me, to our listeners, go text somebody you haven't talked to in 6 months. They need to hear from you because we all need each other really desperately right now. Not only for our short-term well-being, but there's no way we're going to solve the problems that we're all facing alone. We got to do it together, which means we have to figure this loneliness thing out.
So if you're listening, think about that person, go through your history, go through your contacts, find at least one, maybe three people that you haven't talked to in a long time, and
Work those
text them
thumbs.
just to say hi. Yeah, there you go. And send them a funny meme or something else if you want to.
Yeah.
Go for it. Emojis.
Emojis.
All right. Cool. So Darlene, where can listeners learn more about you and your work? If they don't know already.
Yeah, so obviously the show is better than fine. I've got a Substack, coachdar.substack.com, which is all just almost all of its application articles. It's like whatever that thing is that you're,
Coachdar.substack.com. Okay.
yeah, more the Substack's called More Better. Show's better than fine, more better. Um, and then Instagram, I'm Darlene.coach. My website is Darlene.coach. I like to keep it all neat.
Nice. I love
Easier,
it. Yeah.
easier to remember.
All about branding. All right. So this has been a lot of fun, Darlene. Really, I was super excited. I'm glad Carl recommended you, so I want to give him a shout out for that. I'm
Shout out
glad I
Carl.
found you and your content, the whole, just everything. It's so refreshing and it resonates, and I think the listener is going to get a ton of value from this episode. So, thank you so much for coming on the show.